Hello, everyone. We're just going to give this a couple more minutes before we get started to let some of the latecomers join us. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so I think we can start. Welcome everybody again, and thank you for joining us in this webinar, in which we'd like to talk about how to successfully roll out developer-first license compliance management using Snyk. My name is Daniel Berman. I'm a product marketing director for Snyk Open Source, and with me here today are some of my esteemed colleagues from the product team. So Ariel Ornstein, Director of Product. Hello, Ariel.
Hello, everybody.
And Josefa Riveros, Product Manager. Hey, Josefa.
Hey, everyone.
So what we're going to be talking about in the next 30 minutes or so is, first, what are the challenges facing organizations today as they try and manage and govern the various open source licenses they're using in their projects. We'll then take a look at the shift left approach and what the shift left approach promises organizations to help solve these challenges that we're going to start the webinar out with. We'll then take a look at what a developer-first license compliance management solution is and how it helps complement the shift-left approach and build upon it to solve these very same challenges. We'll then take a look at what a developer-first license compliance management solution looks like in the Snyk product with a product demo, and we'll wrap things up with a Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you do have any questions whatsoever during the webinar, please just pop them into the webinar chat and we will do our best to answer these questions, time permitting. All right, so let's dive right in. So open source is everywhere, right? And Snyk research has shown that 80% of application code is actually open source. And this is probably an underestimation. The numbers are probably higher than that. Another interesting stat is stated in a Gartner research going back to last year, in which stated that 96% of applications participating in that research actually include open source code. So impressive statistics by any account. It's not a secret anymore. We know this. Open source is used by all the organizations everywhere. And, you know, it's the fuel that's driving digital transformation that we're witnessing all around us today. But as great as that is, it also means that this growing reliance, this growing usage on open source also introduces a certain amount of risk to organizations. And this risk takes two main shapes and forms. First and foremost, a security risk, but also a legal risk. And that's the context that we want to focus on in this webinar. And this legal risk stems from the various open source licenses included in the open source being used, right? And the problem is that these open source licenses include terms and conditions, various types of regulations and requirements from the user. And not complying with these requirements can, under certain circumstances at least, lead to legal action taken either by the individual developer behind the open source project or sometimes a commercial entity backing the project. And this could lead to fines and lawsuits. And if these legal actions even become public, then it can actually result in serious reputation loss to the organization involved. So just how serious is this risk? Well, we don't have to look far back into history to see some good examples. The most famous of which is, of course, Oracle's claim against Google for illegally using 36 Java APIs, right, in its earlier versions of Android. And this case is still ongoing. It even reached the US Supreme Court, believe it or not. And we're expecting a verdict in this case, but it looks like Google is going to be paying billions of dollars in damages to Oracle. Another famous example, if less expensive, so to speak, is the one of Automatic against Wix. Automatic, to those of you who don't know, is the commercial entity behind WordPress, the PHP-based open source CMS, powering over half of the websites today in the world. And what happened was that in 2016, the founder and CEO of Automatic, Matt Mullenweg, took a look at the code in a mobile app just released by Wix. Wix and Automatic are competitors of sorts. And he found out that some of the code powering this mobile app is indeed WordPress code licensed under GPL. And what ensued was a pretty loud and dirty back and forth between the two companies, especially the leadership of the two companies. And it was quite a famous discussion that happened in those days. And this didn't result in any monetary, in a fine or a lawsuit, but definitely one can claim that Wix suffered a certain reputation loss from this case. And what these examples show, and there are plenty of other examples out there, is why it's important, why license compliance has become a priority, and some of the challenges in there for governing and managing open source licenses. And some of these challenges stem from the fact that the sheer amount of licenses, I mean, depends on who's counting, but there are over 300 different types of open source licenses that can be used today. And it's not just the number of licenses, it's also the different types of licenses. So on the left side of the spectrum, you've got the so-called copyleft licenses, very, very restrictive in nature, such as the GPL family of licenses, which allow you to share the code, but only under very strict conditions, under the same stipulations as defined in the original license. So you can't actually use the code for commercial use, for example. And then on the right side of that spectrum, you've got the copyright licenses, the most famous of which being MIT and Apache, much more permissive. You can basically do whatever you want with the code, modify it, share it, use it, etc. And in the middle, you've got hybrid licenses that contain a bit of the terms and conditions from each types of the licenses on the two sides of the spectrum. Now, the challenge here is that in most cases, your applications are going to include what is a healthy mix of the different types of licenses. So, in a perfect world, all your source code would be MIT, right? But that's never the case. You're going to contain a mix of the different types of licenses, and this makes it really, really challenging for organizations trying to comply, trying to reduce the legal risk, to understand what are the exact legal terms and conditions that they need to comply with. Another side of the challenge is that of visibility, right? So even if you got, say, a small application, just a couple of files, 80 lines of code, these are pulling in 7 open source components, but these in turn will be pulling in another series of open source components. These are so-called transient dependencies or indirect dependencies. And these in turn might be pulling in another set of open source components. And so what happens is that the open source licenses are buried several dependency layers deep in your code. And this makes it, again, really, really difficult, really, really challenging for organizations to get that clarity as to what exactly are the open source licenses that they're using in their projects. Now, license compliance has famously or infamously been regarded as a process that doesn't really fit in well or integrate well into development workflows, especially modern development workflows. And the reason for this being, well, imagine a situation where a compliance team or legal advisor that's consulting the team comes up to the development team, presents them with a spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet is a list of, well, a blacklist of sorts, listing all the open source licenses that the team can't use in their code, according to company license policies. Now, imagine the development team taking this blacklist and cross-referencing all the licenses on that list with, say, hundreds or thousands of components in their application's code base. And imagine this happening after the application is already deployed in production, right? Not very agile, right? So understanding that this type of situation, this type of approach is simply no longer tenable in the world of continuous deployment, where businesses, to remain competitive, need to continuously roll out new code into production more rapidly, more frequently. Understanding this, existing license compliance management solutions have jumped on the shift left bandwagon. And what they promise organizations is to help them automate license policies for better control. They promise them to enable them to work more closely with their developers, to identify license issues earlier on in the development lifecycle, and that's fantastic. But if you take a closer look at how these solutions are implemented, then you'll discover there's a fundamental flaw here. And that's because these solutions are designed from the start, from the top-down angle, designed for the manager role, designed for, say, the security lead, the compliance officer, usually supporting pretty rigid, clumsy and cumbersome license compliance processes. They simply don't work well or integrate well into the way applications are developed today. And the end result here is that developers don't use them. And the best shift left license compliance management solution is not going to be effective the way we need it to be if at the end of the day, developers aren't adopting it. So don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that shift left isn't important. It's absolutely critical to be able to identify license issues as early as possible before it comes too costly, too expensive to fix later on, but it's simply not enough. And the reason for this is because developers are ultimately the ones deciding what open source to include in their projects, in their applications. And because of that, the only way to achieve license compliance, to scale it as the business grows, as the application grows, is to empower developers to fully embrace license compliance. And a developer-first license compliance management solution does that by first giving developers the ownership to embrace license compliance fully with the right set of tools, and second, support the controllers to fully integrate and build license compliance into the organization. And this is exactly where Snyk's developer-first license compliance management solution that we announced 2 weeks ago comes into the picture. Snyk enables organizations to maintain their rapid development pace at scale while also remaining compliant with the various open source licenses they're using. And we do that first by empowering developers to embrace license compliance, to integrate license compliance easily into their existing workflows. And we do that with developer-friendly tooling. On the other side, we give the controllers the ability to control license compliance more effectively by giving them automated policies and granular management capabilities. And last but not least, we give organizations both wide and deep visibility into the various open source licenses they're using across their various projects. So that's about it from me for now. What I'd like to do now is hand over control to Ariel and Josefa for a product demo.
Hi, everybody. Both Josefa and I are going to walk you through the product demo. We'll do three main things. Josefa will walk you through how you can set up a license policy, and then I'll take you through how you can integrate our Snyk support for license compliance throughout the SDLC, and then the reports. Moving now into the policies part and handing over to Josefa.
Awesome, thanks, Ariel. So, like Ariel and Daniel have mentioned, we've recently released some new functionality that'll help with our license governance. So, in the past, license policies were managed on an individual organization basis. For some of our large customers, this became really unwieldy to continue managing. If you wanted to update a couple of licenses or change some instructions, it involved a lot of effort to go into all of these orgs and update these. So for our pro and enterprise customers, they now have this new policy manager section that they can access where they can manage these license policies at a group level. This is the first step that Snyk is taking to much broader shared policies stories. So right now we're looking at license policies. We're starting work on security policies shortly, and that'll move into container policies, dependency policies, things like that. So I'll walk you through quickly how we can go about setting these license policies and managing them, and then Ariel will walk through what those look like when you actually start running a test. So the first thing we have here is the Snyk default license policy. This is automatically imported for you when you create a new group. So these are just some recommendations that we have for specific severities for some licenses. So you can see here all of the organizations that we have within this group are currently assigned to our default policy. And on the right-hand side here, I have a list of licenses with some already set severities. So if I'd like to go in and customize these severities, I could select from these drop downs and modify them to be high, medium, or low. and I can also add in legal instructions. So if I were to click on the legal instruction icon, I could go in and enter some. So let's pick GPL 2.0 and GPL 3. It's a little bit laggy. Cool. So that I can take some legal instructions, and these legal instructions will appear for my developers. Oops. When I run Snyk tests in the CLI, or if I yep, thanks, Ariel. If you're running tests in the CLI and also within the UI directly. So then you can set a severity or a license legal instruction on these. And when we, like I said, when we run those tests, these will appear for us. So we did GPL 3 already, and we did GPL 2, so we can save this. And like I said, those 4 organizations are applied to this policy, but maybe a couple of those applications actually belong on a different policy. There's a different set of rules that we'd like to apply to those organizations. So we can click this mobile team license policy, and we can open this one up. We can assign some different organizations to it, and we can customize some severities in here. We can add a description, customize the name, and yeah. So with all these, once we start running these tests, you'll see the severities for these licenses as they appear for your developers when they're running their Snyk tests in the CLI and in the UI. They can also see if they're violating any license severities. You can set settings to flag any high license severities so that tests can fail specifically for high severity license issues. So that's pretty much it in terms of setting the policies. Right now, a policy can be assigned to multiple different organizations, but each organization can only have one policy assigned to it. The team's looking at creating some more granular functionality in this area with project tags. So you could assign project tags to specific projects within an organization, and using these project tags, then set policies based on those tags. So let's say, for example, in my mobile teams organization, I have 2 sets of projects. One needs license policy A and one needs license policy B. Instead of splitting these out into new organizations, in the future, you'll be able to use project tags to differentiate those projects from each other and set license policies based on those project tags. So that's it from me on the policies front. Thanks, Ariel.
Thank you, Josefa. Second, let me take over control. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to take you through the SDLC. So just to circle back on what SDLC is. So we look at the SDLC lifecycle with a few phases relevant for license compliance, starting with coding time, and then looking at Git, and then CI/CD, and then we kind of have like the compliance gate right before we go into production. And now I'm going to show you how we can support your use cases in each of every step. So starting with the coding side, the coding time, I'm going to go to the CLI. This is my terminal. And the very first thing a developer can do when starting to use Snyk is run a Snyk test. It's very easy, just Snyk test. I'm adding an organization to make sure I'll grab the policy that we want me to grab. Waiting a bit, and here you can see the output of the CLI, which includes all the vulnerabilities that we found, how we advise developers to fix them. And if you scroll to the bottom, you can see the license issues, and inside you can also see instructions, if you remember, that Josefa added. So you can see here for my GPL 2.0 license, the legal department asks not to use, and I should contact them if I do want to use them. So this is the code that I already have. So let's say now I want to add to install a new package. So just npm install is something that a developer will do on a daily basis. Going to install the package. Okay, so the package is installed, and the next thing I would like to do is to run again the Snyk test and see how it affected. Oops, sorry about that. Just a second. I want to see how it affected my results. Let me just pick this one. Okay, and as you can see now, I have, if I had only one license issue, now I have three. One of them is a GPL 3.0, which is because I added the styling package, and it also brought another dependency that brought in the MPL 2.0 as well. So this is the first thing that a developer can do. And the next thing the developer can do is to run a Snyk monitor. Second. When I run the Snyk monitor, and now I'll go to the UI. So this is the Snyk UI, and here you can see that I have one project that I already imported. Let's see if the other one is ready. Just a second. Go to it. Okay, so this is the project that I added, and here you can see in the UI, you can see a lot of vulnerabilities that we found. Obviously, this is a demo app that we added, so it's okay to have those vulnerabilities. And I can also filter and see only the licenses issues. And here you can see also the instructions that we just added. So this is the coding time. This is what we can show developers as they code, and help them fix the license issue before it becomes the real issue in production. The next thing that we'll want to do is probably to go into the Git phase and to import our projects from Git. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to import the project from Git. So this is the project that I want to import. Give it a few seconds. Okay, so I imported one project successfully, refreshing the screen. And again, I can go into that project, and this project and this page looks pretty much like the previous page. But one thing that's worth mentioning is once I import the project into Snyk, I'm starting to monitor the project. And monitoring the project has two meanings. One of them is we are going to run a daily test on this project in case, for security vulnerabilities that we don't know today, but we might disclose tomorrow or the week after. So this is something that we will notify about. And the next thing is that we check every PR that a developer will create, and then we can act upon it. So for example, if a developer created that PR that added the styling package that I just did in the CLI, if I go into GitHub, and these are the checks in GitHub, so you can see that the build checks are passed successfully, but here you can see that the license check did not go successfully. And then you can configure what you want to do about those checks. You can decide that you want to fail the merge, or just to notify you about it. But these are the two things you can do. And so we saw code, we saw Git, and the next step will be CI/CD. So the CI/CD for being the compliance gating. So we have many dedicated plugins for specific CI/CD applications. And if you don't find the specific one you're using, we have our own Snyk CLI and the Snyk APIs that you can integrate into almost every CI/CD out there. So this is a walkthrough the SDLC lifecycle of an app. And the next thing I want to show you is our report. So basically, this will serve the license, the legal team more. And you can see here the table. I'm looking at all dependencies I have inside this group. On the left side, you can see what is the name of the dependency, what is the version, and in addition to that, which license it has, and what are the copyrights that we found. And obviously, you can export this into a CSV as well. The last thing for me, so the ecosystem that we cover. So we're starting with Java, JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, Swift and Objective-C, Golang, .NET, and Python. And currently we collect the copyright info for Java and JavaScript. And now I'm going to bring back to Daniel.
Okay, thank you, Ariel, and thank you, Josefa, for the product demo. So to summarize things, if you all had to take anything away from this webinar, even if you're not a Snyk user, it'd be the next 3 tips or best practices that we recommend to successfully roll out what we call developer-first license compliance management. So first off, developers make a lot of decisions every day as part of their workflow. And what we want to do is help them make the right compliance decisions. And to do that, as we saw, as Ariel demoed, we need to try and help them test their code as early as possible for license issues. It's no good coming up with that checklist, with that spreadsheet when their code's already in production, right? We also want to try and help them understand the difference between the different license types, between the different license issues, to give them as much context as possible. We do that, of course, with building the knowledge, building the skills, and with the right tools that give them that context. And we also need to try and ensure or foster a good relationship between the developers in the organization and the controllers on the other side to ensure that, A, developers don't feel shy, they feel confident in approaching the controllers with any question or issue, and vice versa. So the 2 teams can work together and in parallel, not a sequential or subsequent type of process. Second, what we've got to remember is that these days developers are being loaded with more and more responsibilities, right? New tools, new processes, new methodologies, and if we want them to handle license compliance as well, we need to give them the right tools to enable them to do that, right? So these tools need to be easy to use, easy to deploy. They need to integrate seamlessly into their existing workflow and not interrupt that workflow. These tools need to give developers full visibility into their license issues so they can understand exactly where in their code, where in the project these license issues were actually introduced. And we need to do this across the board, right? It's not enough to integrate in the CI/CD stage. We need to go left, we need to go right on the SDLC to ensure that developers can easily integrate license compliance across that software development lifecycle. And last but not least, to have the confidence to empower developers to embrace license compliance, organizations first of all need visibility, right? We need to be able to track and monitor at any given time, any build, any iteration, what are the exact open source components I'm using, what are the open source licenses included there, and we can do that with dashboards or reports. Preferably, both of these are consumable, easy to read, easy to generate. And once we have that visibility in place, we need to invest in making the important distinction between what are hard lines and soft lines in governance, meaning when is it absolutely critical to interrupt the development workflow and when it isn't, all right? And this distinction will make a world of difference for your development team. It's the difference between pulling the cord, stopping the deployment because there's a serious legal issue, and giving the green light to the developer to actually push that deploy button, push that code into production, even though there's a minor license issue, and then have the compliance or legal team take a look afterwards. Okay, so to wrap things up, just a couple of links here to some resources that you guys can use to learn more about Snyk's license compliance management solution. There's some info on our website, of course, a couple of blog posts that are worth checking out. There's a video that details the solution as well. If you're short on time, it's only 5 minutes long or so. And of course, some technical docs that go a bit deeper into detail around the different functionalities that we provide. So it is time for some questions. Let's take a look at what we have. So first off, what languages do we support license scanning for? Ariel, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah, I can take that. So we support Java, JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, Swift and Objective-C, Golang, .NET, and Python.
Okay. Another question here is, with the new tagging feature, would it be possible to select the license policy tag from the command line? I think, Josepha, that's one for you.
Yep. So you'll set the tags either via the API or via the UI. And once those tags are applied to the specific projects, then you'll assign the policy to a tag through the UI. The results of that policy will be visible in the CLI, though, but no applying the tags directly through the CLI at this point.
Cool. Another question here is, can you prevent software with licenses you don't want from being added to projects in an organization? I think that's another one for you, Zephyr.
Yep. So currently our Snyk tests can block issues that are high severity. So the recommendation here would be to set those licenses that you don't want to be merged into your projects as a high severity, so that your developers are getting alerted on those specific licenses that you don't want in your projects.
Okay, another one here is this a separate Snyk solution, or is this an add-on? This is definitely not an add-on or a separate solution. This is part of Snyk's overall offering. Snyk enables organizations to find and fix both security vulnerabilities and license issues. So this is definitely not an add-on, a separate add-on. This is part and parcel of the same solution. And this is actually related, I can see, to another question here. What plans is license compliance management supported in? So we support, this is supported in different variations from our standard plan onwards. Another question here is, do you have some blog post or white paper on software licenses themselves? We definitely do have some blog posts available. No white paper to my knowledge, but I'll definitely look into that and send out any information. What about Scala? Ariel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sorry about that. Scala is supported too.
Okay. and what is important to know, which licenses you have to comply with if you're building SaaS, running code on the cloud servers internally without distributing it to customers or selling the product itself. Ariel, you want to take that one?
So yeah, sure. So actually, I'm going to give a lead, but not a straight answer. I think this is up to your legal team to decide. You can use every license that you like, and you can say that no one will find out. But then what happens if someone will? And this is for your legal team to manage, and for you to manage the risks there.
Okay, so I think that covers all the questions that we got. I'd like to thank you all for participating. Thank you, Ariel and Josefa, for your participation as well. Very deeply appreciated. This webinar was recorded, so you guys will get this email to you, and anybody registered actually will get this recording as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.